Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very excited to have you on. I enjoyed our conversation right before we went live. I try to follow things as much as I can. I love your social media, I like your platform. And so I'm always excited to have somebody who's a servant leader slash community leader on the show. So I know a little bit about you, but I'm not sure if the audience does. So will you give us a little origin story?
Sure, sure. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Monique Worrell. I'm a candidate for state attorney in Orange and Osceola County. I started my career in this community 20 years ago as a public defender. I date myself every time I say that. um, After that, I went into private practice where I practiced criminal defense work. And then I was recruited by my alma mater, University of Florida College of Law, go Gators,
Go
to come
Gators.
back, go Gators, to come back as a law professor. And there I developed the Criminal Justice Center and am responsible for training many of the criminal law practitioners across the state and some throughout the country. And I always taught my students to go out and fight for fairness and equality in the criminal legal system.
So
After
you've been
seven,
an
yeah,
advocate. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yes, yes, I've been a criminal justice reform advocate for my entire career. After 17 years of doing that, I went to the state attorney's office, and as an assistant state attorney, I led the conviction integrity unit where we investigated cases of wrongful conviction. And after that, I was recruited by Reform Alliance, a national nonprofit organization, again, based on criminal justice reform, to do probation and parole reform. And I developed their legal department where we advocated for probation and parole reform. So I've been doing this for a little while.
You have been doing it for a little while. You don't look like you could be doing it for that long at all.
Thank you. Thank you so
Uh,
much.
so tell me about reform, though. It sounds like reform and being an advocate has been part of who you are for a long time. Were you always like that as a child? Did you come from a household where there was advocacy?
So yes, I've always been like that. And yes, it started from a child. And it's not because I come from a household where there was advocacy, but I came from a household that was impacted by the criminal legal system. My oldest brother, who's a veteran of the United States Air Force, was diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar disorder. And like many people with that disorder, he self medicated because the medication that's prescribed often makes them feel uh, like zombies. So he self medicated for relief and developed an addiction. And because of that addiction, he spent much of my life in and out of the criminal legal system. And at the age of 9, I knew that it was wrong to incarcerate someone who was mentally ill and addicted. And my entire path has been based on reforming the criminal legal system as a result of that.
You have a very personal reason. I think that's what happens. You get that personal experience,
Yeah.
and those are some of the things you never forget. You just know that feeling. You know what it was like to think about your brother back then, and I'm sure it's been a motivating factor. I think anything to do with advocacy, though, brings on a lot of people grow. I feel like they grow out of it. They grow into their career and they grow out of it, but you haven't done that.
No, no, that was my purpose. That was my destiny. So every single step that I've taken in my career path has been moving me towards that. And although the path that I'm on now was what I perceive to be an unlikely path, it's directly in line with everything that I've done.
Isn't that amazing how that works out? Why did you think it would be unlikely?
Because I fought on the defense side for my entire career, and I thought that that was the way for me to make a difference. It wasn't until I went to work as an assistant state attorney and I began researching and studying wrongful conviction and the leading causes of wrongful conviction and how they are preventable. And when I realized that those causes were still in practice in the state attorney's office, I realized that the best way to actually impact change in the system was to do it as a state attorney.
So I'm going to get to the state attorney run in a little bit, but I want to ask you about the title is A Fresh Perspective on Justice. It couldn't be any more timely with everything that's going on. And I'd like to ask you if you can give the audience your perspective of Black Lives Matter. And we talked a little bit in pure transparency a little bit before, because I always like to ask the guest if they're comfortable talking about it. I think we need more people to be comfortable talking about it. But can you give us your perspective?
Yeah, so like I told you earlier, it's something that I've actually been asked about a lot lately. And initially, I didn't understand why there was such a deep division between this Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. And as I began engaging in more conversation, what I realized is that we are not saying something different. We really are saying the same thing. It's just for people to understand that the reason why Black Lives Matter is said is because, yes, we want all lives to matter, but all lives cannot matter because currently Black lives do not matter. When and unless and until Black lives begin to matter, all lives don't matter.
Where do you think the gap is in people understanding that? Is it because you just really have this divisiveness and it's never going away, or do you feel like there's an education component that we're missing?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an education thing that's missing. I spoke with several individuals who said that they were off put by Black Lives Matter because that made them feel like their life didn't matter, right?
Right.
So they're perceiving it incorrectly. They're perceiving Black Lives Matter as an indictment against everyone else's life, when in fact Black Lives Matter is said to say, in order for it to be all inclusive, Black Lives Matter have to matter too.
And why do people in your just, I didn't ask you this before, but I am curious. Why do you think people feel like they have to choose Black Lives Matter over Blue Lives Matter? What's it's just there's such a they're all not disarrayed, but they're not in conjunction with each other. I think people feel like it has to be one or the other. What do you think?
You know, I think blue lives are not a thing, right? Law enforcement is a profession, it's not a life, right? It's a profession that people choose and that they can choose to not do as well. Being Black is not a choice. So I just think that there is no comparison between the two, and that they should not; those two conversations should not be had, because differently than all lives and Black lives, uh, I've seen the Blue Lives Matter discussion being held in a disparaging context.
Right. All right. So you are running for state attorney. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Before we get into that, tell us what a state attorney is slash does.
Yeah. And that's a really good question because honestly, the state attorney race is often not very well paid attention to. And that's because a lot of people don't know what a state attorney is or what a state attorney does. I've had a lot of people say, "So you're running for the state attorney for the state of Florida?" And no, is the answer to that. I'm not running for state attorney for the state of Florida. The person who is the attorney for the state of Florida is called the attorney general, which is very different than the state attorney. The state attorney, and there is one for each of the 20 judicial districts, I'm sorry, judicial circuits, is the individual in each circuit who determines what charges will be filed, whom charges should be filed against, what penalties should be sought when convictions are obtained, how individuals should be dealt with after convictions or prior to convictions being obtained. And the most real example of this I can give is in the recent cases with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, the individuals who were recently murdered. It was the state attorney who made a decision to charge those individuals or to not charge those individuals. And that was a big thing because there were a lot of people saying, well, why weren't charges brought in those cases? And
Right.
those were decisions to be made by the state attorneys in those individual cases.
So you mentioned earlier that you are very pro reform. You're about you use the word, you didn't use the word judicial, but you're about reform in general. I'll let you give the real definition there. But where is that in the whole scheme of things as far as state attorney goes? Why state attorney, and how does that make the impact that you want it to make?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So if you look at the history of our criminal legal system, you'll see that we had a lot of things that happened, like crime bills of the 80s and 90s, the war on drug, a lot of failed policies that have led to mass incarceration. And when I'm talking about mass incarceration, I mean that since the 70s, we've increased our prison population here in Florida by more than 300%. Okay. We currently have a prison budget of more than $2.4 billion, right? And a great percentage of the individuals that we have in our prisons are nonviolent offenders. They're there for drug and property offenses. So reform says that that's wrong. We shouldn't do that, that we're destabilizing our communities because we're taking people out of the community who could be contributing members of society if they were given a chance. Reform says we're going to look at the root cause of why people offend and try to address the root cause. So if someone has mental illness, prison isn't going to solve that. If someone is addicted, prison isn't going to solve that. And especially in those two occurrences, what prison does is exacerbate the problem because now we have traumatized individuals who are already suffering. And in 3 to 5 years, when they return to the community, they will likely be violent because prison is a violent atmosphere. And in prison, you are either victimized or you are the person who is doing the victimizing. So we want to keep people out of prison who don't belong in prison. Who doesn't belong in prison? People who are not a danger to the safety of society.
Right.
So by keeping those individuals in the community, we create vibrant and stable communities. We boost our economy because we have more individuals who are working and less people, less families who are in need of resources because they have the stability of resources in their households. And we decrease recidivism because if we're actually getting to the root cause to begin with, then those individuals will be less likely to reoffend. So that's reform and what it means to me. And you do that through the state attorney's office because it's the state attorney who does, like I said, decide who to charge, what charges to bring, and what sentences to seek.
So you can establish policy. You can establish policy that, or you don't have, you can change the way people are charged, what they're charged for, who goes into the system, or where they go within the overall giant system. I
Yes.
did not know that. So you can actually help change the way that that is done, which will
Right.
impact people. What about the people in there? I get a lot of questions about that. What are your thoughts on the people who are serving terms for nonviolent? There's a big debate over that, a big debate. Should they be
Right.
let out early? Is that something a state attorney does? Educate me, because I actually don't know.
So there was legislation just recently to address just that, to let out people who are nonviolent offenders, to let out people who are over the age of 55, because research shows us that a lot of times crime it reduces with age and people age out of crime or criminal behavior. And that legislation unfortunately failed. So, what I cannot do at state attorney is legislate. I can lobby to the legislatures to change the laws, but I cannot legislate. All I can do is impose policy on how my office will enforce the laws that are currently in effect.
I love that you chose that and it wasn't the path you thought, because I think that's what is so unique about the story. You went with the path because of what your beliefs were and your advocacy and your heart. I think a lot of people would like to follow in your footsteps. You've done a lot of work in the community. What do you think about the relationship between the state attorney and the community, and what kind of things do you want to do as state attorney?
So, as I mentioned earlier, I spent 17 years as a professor at University of Florida. And what that means is that education is part of my fiber. And what I'd like to do is do a lot more with educating the community on their rights and responsibilities as citizens, educating the community on community resources that can assist them. assisting victims, even those who we don't end up prosecuting the offenders in their cases, that doesn't make them any less of a victim. So connecting victims with the appropriate resources so that they can become whole.
I love that.
As a defense attorney, I understand the intersection between victims and defendants, meaning that today's victim can end up being tomorrow's defendant. That's just the nature of the system. So ensuring that those individuals have access to services instead of criminalizing everything and using incarceration as a one size fits all response to the offenses in our community.
So are you feeling that we're really on the I had somebody ask this before we went live earlier in the week. Are you feeling that we are on the cusp of a real revolution as far as advocacy, social justice, justice in general? Are we really on that path, or is it a lot of smoke and mirrors right now?
I hope we are. I hope we are. And it's going to be highly contingent on us, on who we vote for. Because if we continue to vote for people who are doing the same thing, then we're going to get the same thing, right? Insanity is defined as doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So if we continue to vote for people who have done the same things that have proven to be ineffective, then we're not going to have any change. But if we put new people in place who will do things differently, then we have our greatest opportunity for change.
Great. All right. So I asked this of everyone who's on the show. What have you done personally, not work related, to keep your sanity, your groundedness, your mental clarity up during COVID and during all of this lockdown, not lockdown insanity we have been going through?
I get massages.
Nice.
I get massages. That massages help keep my sanity. And we're living in a very insane time. So every couple of weeks, I unplug and I take an hour to get a massage at Oshun Day Spa in downtown Orlando.
Awesome. Oh, a good plug too. I like that. Small business guys, support
Yes,
local.
yes.
I love that because I think people need that self-care. I like to hear different ideas. I think at the height of it all, nobody knew what they were doing and everybody was in this stressed out, frenzied mode. And then of course we've got so many ups and downs and we're all trying to figure out, maneuver through whatever this new world is. How do people get involved in your campaign? If somebody wants to reach out to you, ask you questions, support you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
So first, let me say, please, please, please get involved in my campaign. And you can do that at moniqueforstateattorney.com. It's MONIQUEFOR, stateattorney.com. On social media, I'm at Monique for State Attorney on Facebook and elect Monique State Attorney on Instagram. So please, please, please check me out and let's get involved and help me bring this thing to a race.
You're a joy. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your perspective. It's just so important, I think, for the community to see leaders and people involved like you talk about the issues in a way that is from the heart. It's to see that. It's one of the reasons why I love this platform, because you really can see what's going on in somebody's face and you can hear it in their voice. I really, really appreciate you being on, Monique. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Ted. It's been a pleasure.
All right. See you guys. MoniqueForStateAttorney.com. Scroll across the bottom. We'll see you guys later.